region as well, can cultivate a sustainable process of talent development in both tech-based workforce and entrepreneurial pipelines of productivity that bolster regional competitiveness. Now, we define, we measure competitiveness rather through productivity. And those productivity are through two pipelines, workforce pipeline and the entrepreneurial pipeline. And when we look at those pipelines of productivity, we're looking for equity. Now, what do I mean by equity? There's a lot of different definitions out there. We're okay with everybody's definition. Here's ours. The same definition that an investor uses, the same definition that a CEO uses is equitable ownership. So when we look at equity, we look at two things. One, equitable access to resources like education, like the networks and the capital that you need. So equitable access to resources. And then of course, equitable ownership, land, homes, businesses. So when I look at Minneapolis and I see that Black home ownership is 25%, that's, and we start looking at white home ownership, which is 76%. When we look at who owns the businesses, and when we look at who owns the businesses, we look at employer businesses very tightly. And when we look at employer businesses, we know that nationwide, 80% of all businesses are owned by white America, 80%. So that leaves the rest of the businesses owned by minorities. When we go to each region, we look to see, are you capturing that data and seeing who owns your employer businesses? Who are your job creators? Who's doing your hiring? And in what sectors? And what is the productivity that's coming out of those sectors? And so if you have in your white population, which is 59% in Minneapolis, for example, if they own 42% of your employer landscape, you can see that that is a tremendous overrepresentation, whereas the rest of your minorities population might own 3%. So we're looking at those kinds of data to see if your strategies line up with your equitable vision, your equitable goals. And if your equitable goals are measurable, we should be able to look at your baseline, where you started, what you inherited, what your goals are, and what your strategy is to move that needle. Does that make sense?
It does. And I'll ask the follow-up question to you before I go on to other panelists. And I think you somewhat answered this already, saying that the data that is available to you is part of what accelerates and or impedes impact. But I want to know, as you try and match that strategy to data, would you add anything else into that mix of what can and needs to be in place to accelerate impact?
Well, we start with looking at the type of economy that we have. We have a tech-based, globally competitive innovation economy. And so when we look at that, we look at what are the entry points. Your education sector has to be preparing the economic athletes that are going to compete in a globally competitive tech-based innovation arena. And so we go to your K-12 and your higher education sector, and we start to look at how are you preparing these children, and particularly your underrepresented minorities, your most vulnerable populations, who, by the way, because of racial demographic shifts, are going to be the most populous talent pool that you have. Are they being prepared to compete in both the workforce pipelines and the entrepreneurial pipelines? And are they getting those types of skills that they need? STEM education, STEM, and we say STEAM, we put the arts in there. STEAM education is the sole entry point to a 21st century tech-based innovation economy, sole. So if we're not seeing STEM education writ large inculcated throughout your education system, we know that there's a gap in the strategy, because you're going to have to develop those talent pools for both of those pipelines of productivity. And on the other side, we're talking about ownership, equitable ownership of homes, lands, and businesses. Where did we start? Where are we finishing? How are we measuring that? What's our strategy to get there?
Thank you, Mike. Commissioner Carter, from your seat as a commissioner since 2005 and as the chair of the board, how is Ramsey County, in your view, redefining community economic development, undoing racist policy and practice, deeply engaging community, and exploring and catalyzing innovative partnerships?
Well, thank you so very much for the question, Ryan. And as our key leader in Ramsey County, I know that you could probably share all of the thoughts that I am going to, but thank you for providing me with the opportunity. First, I have to say that as I listened to Mike, I was just so taken up by the focuses that he has shared. And I would say that from the perspective of data, we have traveled a journey in Ramsey County of understanding who we are for a number of years. And as the most densely populated community and one of the most diverse in the state of Minnesota, we have come to an understanding of the fact that our demographics require that we be a leader in pursuing equity and innovation and connecting for an inclusive economy in Ramsey County. County manager had shared our vision of a community where all are valued and thrive. That is backed up by goals that ensure that we're working toward health and well-being, to ensure opportunity for all, to engage all in the promise and the opportunity to create prosperity for their own lives. We're working to utilize all of our assets, people, land, and capital, and to engage our community in such a way that we are working with, not just for, but actually with the people in our community. We have been changing ourselves and really challenging ourselves as a board and a county, together with our community partners and leaders and all of our residents, and especially those whose voices have not yet been heard, because we have key opportunities. You know, I came from a school board where we struggled every day and every year as we talked about the gaps, the achievement gaps for children. We came to understand there, and we know in Ramsey County that we're looking at huge opportunity gaps, and not just for those that have been left aside or out of our economy, but for all of us, but for the opportunity to turn around those gaps and to connect people to opportunity for prosperity. We stand to endure a very difficult future. So the work that we're doing is not just about them, it is about all of us. We're centering racial equity and community engagement in everything we do, asking the critical questions of who benefits from our county's actions? Is that an equitable distribution of benefit? And this is a very, very big shift in the way that government systems have typically operated. Specifically, we know that our county and economic prosperity that we have enjoyed at large has been derived from decades of racial policies, covenants, and discrimination, you know, everything from redlining to wage and job discrimination, and the inability for people of color to start small businesses. Even low income people in many cases are left out. So the work that we're doing in aligning economic development and workforce strategies, such as Ling and Kari will be talking about, is all focused on aligning all of our resources through a new economic competitiveness strategy that will help us to reverse those traditional ways, processes, and procedures that we have had, even for reaching out to engage community, and particularly, of course, for contracting and procurement, and for making certain that the wealth of our economic system is shared equitably and throughout our community. We're working to reverse the paradigms that have existed historically and to promote economic mobility and prosperity for all, especially focused on our Black, Indigenous, and people of color neighbors. We're working to ensure that all residents have access to wealth building through quality housing, and the ability to create and to grow businesses, to have living wage jobs, to advance their careers. So we're looking to do this work with our traditional community partners, and also to be flexible and innovative to create those new partnerships and collaborations that we need so as to help us succeed. You know, during COVID-19, we learned a lot. One of the things that we did early on was we created a focus on racial equity and community engagement so that the resources such as those that we've received through the coronavirus relief funding have had an oversight, both with community at the table with us, as well as with Ramsey County system leaders working together, again, with community to ensure that we will continue to build trust, and not only build trust and engage with community, but to hear, listen to, and center those voices as we build policy moving forward, whether it's in our economic inclusiveness and competitive plan or across the board in all of the work that we do in Ramsey County.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I'm going to swing toward Ling and ask that question now from a practitioner end on the workforce side. And as I do, I think the one piece I would only add to what you just said is, and I was talking to someone about this yesterday, where you went on the part about centering community and sharing power at tables and changing your structure is absolutely something Ramsey County has done. I want to acknowledge for entities as they do that, it is intentionally disruptive to your existing system. And far too often we view disruption as a bad thing. It will make your life more challenging in the traditional organizational ways in which you have operated. That is one of the points, in fact, as you change a system. Agitation is a part of making things look different and work differently. And as an administrator who needs to keep things moving, one of the things I have learned along the way is to remind myself in stressful moments, the agitation ultimately is why we are here doing what we are doing. It's okay that things are not just fully defined and easy along its path.
Yeah.
Director Becker, please share a few thoughts from a workforce perspective on this topic.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Commissioner, it warmed my heart to hear you mention the people aspect as you're focusing on economic development, because I feel like sometimes that call out gets missed. And, you know, we all know that the pandemic has been obviously very hard. I would say that in many ways, the county was ready for this pandemic in the way that we've been set up even pre-pandemic with the goals and strategic plan that the board has put before us, but also that government structures can be very challenged to do transformational work. And pre-Kari and I, the structures were changed so that our work now can be done more responsively, and that this economic inclusiveness is more available for us to be able to grasp as an entity. And so part of that means that the workforce department in our county is not in its traditional place within social services and generally kind of a health and social services kind of structure. We are sitting right inside economic growth and community investment. And that was a very strategic decision on behalf of the county leadership several years ago. And it really allows us to really think about what inclusive economic development is, which is many of the things that Mike mentioned around land, buildings, capital, but also people, right? People like that Commissioner Carter and Mike mentioned, that's such an integral part. And for us, it's really thinking about family stability, thinking about the people who are in our systems, whether they are on public assistance, whether they've been in part of our, in our corrections system, whether they've aged out of foster care. All these people have dreams and aspirations and have a very equal role in helping to advance the economy that we have. And I'll be excited to share a little more as we go on to the conversation, especially around what Mike was saying around tech and entrepreneurship, because when we ask people who we work with on our systems about what they're interested in, those are the things that they call out. And we have not found a way to sort of bring them those resources that they need to actualize that self aspiration that they have. And that is something that we're aiming to do as a county, is to bring everyone to being able to reach their full potential. So thank you, Ryan.
Ling, thank you for putting a pin in that. We will come right back on the part about economic power building in a second, and we will go right to tech first on that. Kari, what would you like to add to round out this question?
Sure. As we started and proceeded with the economic competitiveness and inclusion vision plan, Mike, I'm happy to hear about the focus of your work, because I think it really translates to what we've been doing here in the county. And I'll just share that, following the murder of George Floyd, I had the opportunity of talking with many of our business leaders. And they said something, and this gets to a later conversation, Ryan, about kind of sharing power. But, they said, we've got to stop inviting people to the table. We need to build a new table. And so as part of this experience, this plan for Ramsey County is really building that new table. And so it's not just tweaking economic development, it's changing economic development to be focused on the person. And I just wanted to share, a few of the highlights coming out of the plan in terms of racial equity. It's about that, not just intersectionality of economic development plan elements or pillars, but it's about intentionality as well. To your point, Mike, what you were saying earlier. And I just want to share that some of the kind of concepts and strategies that may result from this plan include expanding affordable home ownership opportunities and improving housing stability for communities that have experienced historic wealth extraction. So it's that intentionality, and expanding and developing pathways to entrepreneurship for BIPOC business ownership. Again, it's that intentionality piece that has been missing in terms of the conversations around land, capital, and traditional economic development mechanisms. And so I'm really pleased that this is kind of the intentionality focus is what separates it from economic development roadmaps of the past. So I'll just pause there.
That point about you have to build a new table, don't play within an old box, really ties, it's a nice bookend to where Mike started, which is, if you simply start from a paradigm that started before you and keep trying to work it through to solve something you want to now solve, you're never going to get there. You have to rebuild it. And I really appreciate you ending there. That really tied well to where we started. I'm going to run back to Mike now and start on the second question as we talk specifically about how you build economic power within communities. And I think some of these actually came up in the answers that we just heard from everybody already. So I would ask it this way. Could you highlight a couple of areas that you say, if we're going to build economic power, you have to do these things? And I heard Mike say STEAM before, so we're gonna say you have to do STEAM. But what else we want to add to that, Mike?
Okay, well, I appreciate this question. And one of the things, I just want to give you guys a shout out. I really like the way you think. As I go around the country, the paradigms that we have and the perspectives that we have in our planning and economic development ecosystems is key. We all inherited a segregationist system, a segregationist society, and we have to acknowledge that. The baseline that when we came into our roles, you all said how long you've been there. When you came into your roles, you came there and there's a baseline, and that baseline we inherited from a 20th century segregationist society. That being said, it's segregation in education, in housing, in transportation, in access to capital. It's ubiquitous. That being said, Ryan, you touched on it. You have to disrupt the status quo, because you only have two options. Either we're going to sustain the status quo or we're going to disrupt it. So I'm going to start there. When we disrupt the status quo, we're not disrupting just because it's bad, but we have a vision. And that vision has to be grounded in equity, right? And we have to be able to define data-wise what that equitable outcome is that we envision. So that as we begin to move, we have barometers of success. At the NIC, we use our most vulnerable populations. They are our priority. As we move them toward a 1% productivity in both workforce and entrepreneurial pipelines, we are able to measure that. And everybody else benefits. When they talk about that rising tide lifts all boats, well, we start with the very bottom, the most vulnerable populations. We move them, everybody else benefits, right? And so that being said, we have to have vision. We start with a vision, measurable. We then have to have a strategy that, how do we deploy that vision? And then we have to plan around that strategy. And of course, then we have to invest in what it takes to deploy all of the plans with that marry up to that strategy. And then of course we have to measure it, right? All the way we have to measure from STEM education. Are we actually cultivating the right kind of, are we cultivating the talent that we already have? And are we doing it in the right way? In other words, we have growth sectors of our society. Do we know what those are? Do we know what the sustainable sectors of our society are? Especially when we talk about healthcare and particularly climate change. So where's our industry evolving? And are we married to that and cultivating our talent to be competitive in those industries through workforce, high wage jobs, and entrepreneurial high growth enterprises, so that we see our most vulnerable populations as job creators, not just a labor force. So, and then of course, are we aligned with our equitable goals? And then if, as we tweak our alignment, we go back to looking at our goals, making sure our strategy marries with our vision, making sure our plans are connected to our strategy, and making sure that we have enough investment to make this happen. Now, I'll give you one last thing before I close. The reason why the NIC says we want to increase the productivity of the most vulnerable populations by 1% GDP in one generation, we're talking 20 years, is because right now, we take Black-owned enterprises. Black-owned enterprises right now, 2.6 million, produce less than 1% GDP, less than 1% GDP. That's 155 years after slavery, folks. And we still produce less than 1% GDP. What would it take for us to produce 2% GDP? Hispanic-owned businesses produce 3% GDP. What would it take to produce 4? Now, keep in mind, just Black and Hispanic-owned Black and Hispanic populations by themselves will be 42% of the population by mid-century. Right now, they collectively produce 4% GDP, almost no job growth. That is unsustainable. But that doesn't mean that there isn't talent within those populations. We're not investing in cultivating it right from the very beginning and all the way through. And that's where the work you do at Ramsey County becomes so important, because you've got to set the vision. You've got to develop the strategies. You've got to encourage the investment, and you've got to measure and align it. And you guys are the leaders, and they're following your lead. So I'm excited to hear how you guys are going to move forward.
I think we're all excited, Mike, and I can't help but be even more excited as you frame this up, because that is the opportunity gap indeed for all of us. If you look at the pace of growth in the metropolitan area, for example, and you look at the pace at which, let's take the example, women of color businesses have grown. If we can do just a little bit to boost that growth, then we have the opportunity to expand that production incrementally, not just incrementally, but to really create a vibrant boost for the opportunity for all of us to have a more vibrant economic environment. So as we're looking in Ramsey County at our inclusive economic competitiveness planning work, we are looking to increase quality housing production, because housing is the basis for financial stability and the path to wealth building. In fact, it can provide the opportunity for people to think innovatively and even create the kind of businesses and entrepreneurships that are the foundation for that economic empowerment. And in our community ownership models for housing and the possibility of commercial property being owned by the community, that's a part of the thinking that's coming to this new table that is being set inclusively, and in encouraging those small businesses, especially for Black and Indigenous and people of color owners. We think about an example within Ramsey County and talk about it quite frequently, maybe not frequently enough, but that is of the Rondo community. You know, way back in the 1900s, when the freeways were coming through, communities, Black communities in particular, like Rondo, were run through by the freeways, not thinking of the advantage to those communities, but in fact ripping up homes and businesses, you know, and the economic centers of those communities. And today we have the results. So we've been building upon those kinds of policies that would have ripped communities of their wealth now into this century, where the wealth that would have or could have been built upon by that communities is non-existent. And with these new tables, we are thinking about how to uplift opportunities through that kind of design for community ownership of housing, or even those commercial properties that would help to rebuild, to refound that wealth so that all communities can grow equitably. So it's great to have these new tables, to have these new conversations, and to actually be free to think differently. That tension at the table is exactly what is needed so that we create different policies and procedures and ways of doing this work together to create a different future.
Thanks, Commissioner. And I'm going to transition to a Ling and Kari combo. I know Ling's got something she wants to say at the beginning, but there is this intersection here between the way in which we approach the work through a development lens and the way in which people are a part of it. And so I actually would ask if the two of you can kind of go back and forth and answer it together. As we do, there's one thing Mike said that stands out that I think we have to face in Ramsey County in our own data that we've seen. And I used to be the policy and planning director, and I remember one of the things that stood out to me the most was a day that we looked at, we've been doing work around where our future lies. And one of the big things we came out with is a comment about our people are our future. And if we don't look at who is being left behind under our current system, how we will struggle. But the striking piece is we often in our region talk about employment disparities, right? And we look at unemployment as a really bad proxy for that conversation. Well, what we saw in the run up to 2008, and I would guess we are now seeing play out again, unfortunately right now, is that in Ramsey County, we actually saw a significant decrease in unemployment disparity if defined by people working. We actually saw that it closed to almost nothing at certain points. However, if you look at wages earned by people in our community, the disparity got worse during times of prosperity. And that is unconscionable, because it means that in moments of plenty, we did not see the plenty shared among many. And I just wanted to bring that local illumination in. I'll go to Ling and Kari. Please share some thoughts around economic power and building it with community.
I'll start. You know, I really have been grateful for the work of MSP WIN. They're a philanthropy organization, Twin Cities, that's really taken on a really unique perspective that I think kind of layers in with the work that around racial equity and community engagement that the county is really about. But really this idea of focusing on the underestimated job seeker, the person who is disconnected from kind of the employment ecosystem, and what is their potential. And one story I want to share is that we recently did a info session for people interested in training. It was for healthcare training and a tech training. And due to the pandemic, we just did one info session because we actually weren't able to plug in two. And you know what was amazing? Mike, you'll find this very interesting. The people who came for healthcare, they actually switched over to tech, but they didn't come for tech because they actually didn't know anything about tech, right? And so this is the gap of the underestimated job seeker. We are not and this ties into Ryan about like what you were saying around the wages and, you know, kind of are people getting jobs that actually move them, right? Because a lot of times people just go work at what they know and we sort of check it off the box in our systems that they have a job. But what kind of job? Is it the job that actually they really have a way to grow in a career and to be able to advance their family and be able to own a home and all the other things that generate wealth? And so I really do want to say that we always try to think about the job seeker first and foremost in terms of who they are and what they want to be. The other thing I was going to mention when it comes to economic power is that as a county, I feel like this has been hard for me too, but we have to look really hard at ourselves, at our own work, and where we can contribute to this. And I'll just give one example and then I'll switch it to Kari, but we recently evaluated our temporary hires and we decided that we were going to pivot some things so that we would ensure community would be able to gain more economic opportunities, even as Ramsey County as a large employer. And so there's just so many things that we can tap, but we have to do the hard work ourselves as we try to bring other people along to want to build this inclusive economy with us.
Thanks, and I'll just share, probably 50% of our economic competitiveness and inclusion vision plan is really centered around housing. And to Commissioner Carter's point, in terms of wealth building, we know historically that it was, equity in real estate and education that created wealth over time, the legacy of wealth creation. And wealth building, as we know, translates to power building. So a big piece of this vision plan is to understand where are we at in terms of our housing infrastructure, and housing is infrastructure. You're not going to be able to regionally compete, nationally compete, unless you have identified options and choices. And choices stretch across housing, choices stretch across transit opportunities, across workforce. To Ling's point, you need to have choices to be able to compete and to attract and retain. And right now in Ramsey County, 1 out of 2 renters is considered cost burdened. And that means that they're paying over 30% of their income for housing related costs. 1 out of 4 renters is considered extremely cost burdened, which means they're paying over 50% of their income toward housing related expenses. Through the research we've done, we found that we have a gap of 15,000 rental units that we're missing for those individuals that are earning 30% of area median income. So right now, we are not keeping up with the immediate needs, let alone meeting the demands of our growing economy. And that is, what the board is really intending to rectify is to say, how do we channel resources toward the preservation of naturally occurring affordable housing and to advance supply so that we can ensure that individuals are working their way up through the housing continuum and building wealth. And that is such a critical part into economic competitiveness. Until we start seeing housing as infrastructure in the model, we won't be able to compete. So that's that. I just really want to hone in on that. And I know the work of mapping prejudice has been very enlightening. They're finishing up their work in Ramsey County in early 2021, which will highlight all of the Ramsey County homes that have passed racially restrictive covenants on them. And so, to the earlier conversation about understanding the built environment in terms of where we've been, we're able then to channel resources to be intentional about bringing wealth back into those communities that have experienced the historic wealth extraction. Through our partnership with Minnesota Housing Partnership, we are fine-tuning a map that shows where all naturally occurring affordable housing is and the bands of AMI levels, so that as we identify resources and partners, we can jump in and ensure that affordable housing doesn't convert to market rate, and we're not losing our housing infrastructure as we channel resources towards supply as well. I can't share enough in terms of trying to get individuals to build wealth so that they can own their home, they can own their business. And the way to do that is certainly through housing.
Thank you, Kari. And the last piece here that goes a little beyond our panel, but I think it's important to always mention, and is actually in many ways how Ramsey County got deeply involved in much of the work you're hearing about today. And I want to call out Commissioner Carter for being on the forefront of this work in Ramsey County. It's not the focus today, but if you are unwilling to have conversations about how your justice system functions, you are not having conversations about growing wealth in your community. Because the biggest inhibitor to wealth development and growth starts when we cut off people's ability to be free and live a free life with their own family and in their community. And that's been a really big lens and a part of our work. And that's a very ugly reality for every American community to have to go through. But if you do not start with reforming your system and thinking about what is the purpose of detention and how are you employing it, what is the purpose of incarceration and when is it being used, and how do you simply say this isn't okay, you don't get to talk about people and home ownership because they're behind bars. Commissioner Carter, you went off mute. I think you probably want to add something before I go on.
I do. I want to thank you for the recognition of the importance of that and for uplifting it through the work and policy that is happening at our county. And I also wanted to add that that starts with very, very young children and the manner in which we address disparities and disproportionalities in all our systems, from that point at which young people may be considered for out-of-home placement, and or another way to look at that would be to work on strengthening families so that children can stay in their homes and communities to be nurtured by the people that love them, particularly when the issues of maltreatment may be around economic conditions, the need for food and shelter, and ensuring that those young people are not subject to what we would classify in our systems as neglect. It also includes working to ensure that young people are not detained in our systems for nonviolent crimes, that they have the opportunity to remain in school, to learn, to be able to become contributing members of our community. That participation element is so important. And of course, it reaches to those adults and it impacts community engagement and the ways in which we are able to or not hear people in our communities should they suffer from the collateral consequences of having become a part of our criminal justice system. So the risk to that today in ensuring we have the kind of engagement that we need to have is reaching out to make certain that those folks are at the table with us and that we can benefit from what they have learned in their lived experience. So I'm thankful that we're creating those kinds of transforming systems together engagements in our community, recognizing that aspect is so important.
Thank you,
Thanks for
Commissioner.
calling that out, Ryan.
So I'm going to do the telemarketer thing and just point out to the 22 attendees, we are going to get to your questions. I've got a couple of them or comments here, and we will make sure to have time to go around on them. So please send them in as we go through one last round with the panelists first. I'll make sure we have at least 15 or 20 minutes to do those conversations. I'm going to start with Mike again, though, and I want to ask this question. So as you think about what we've been talking about today, Mike, in the area of what could be replicated or scaled or learnings to lift up, you can go where you want, but I kind of think of it this way. People are getting a lot of information today and in their work, and these are folks that are trying to find ways to be solutions oriented. What do you want them to take with at the end of today, where you say, if you remember nothing else, please remember this, lift this up and begin to do it at home?
Well, it starts with your most vulnerable populations. They are your barometer of success or failure. Cut and dry. We left the 20th century where white priorities, white dominance, white supremacy was everything. It was ubiquitous. Now we're in the 21st century. We're in a multicultural society. We're in an equitable, inclusive America that we're trying to build. But that means we need to redesign, reform, and reconstruct the society that we inherited. So we have to look at zoning policies like you're talking about. We have to look at school systems and the way that the schools were teaching our kids in the 20th century is not adequate for a 21st century outcome that we want. We have to prioritize the most vulnerable populations and their economic empowerment. And so if we keep that at the forefront of all of our strategies, the economic empowerment of our most vulnerable populations and cultivating that talent pipeline and looking at those children as assets, valued assets, instead of deficits. And of course, when you talk about law enforcement, they have a lack of understanding of the communities that they inherited, that they steward. They're high touch entities. They're going to be part of they are a part of our community. They always have been, but as long as there have been police, there's been police brutality. The Negro Congress in 1936 said this: our lives, our homes, our liberties are at risk every day due to unrestrained police brutality. That's 1936. Well, of course, we know that the police beat John Lewis half to death on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Police brutality has always been there, but we need to change the paradigm of police, understanding that they're part of our community. They need to have an understanding of the history that's been inherited and keeping in mind that in 1967, you had 150 plus cities rioting because of systemic racism. And the 1968 Kerner Commission came out with a report that said white society created this mess, and white society condones it, and white society continues to perpetuate it. And so that being said, the systemic problems that we inherited, that the Negro Revolution that Dr. King led, that nobody talks about, that he wrote about extensively in his book, Why We Can't Wait. The Negro Revolution said, we want to end segregation in schools, we want to end discrimination in housing, and we want to end discrimination in banking and access to capital. Those three things we inherited are all worse today. And guess who has to police those communities that are struggling, trying to overcome those systemic problems? The police. And they have no understanding of the history that they've inherited. So we need to learn, we need to think about how we're going to retrain police and create a paradigm shift in their mind, as well as the economic development planners and the zoners and all. I mean, we are rebuilding our society. And so I love this conversation, and I'll sit back and hear what you guys have to say about how we move forward from here.
I don't know. We could probably listen to you go for another 20 minutes, I think. I know my folks here would probably do that for sure. We'll have to find another day where we get to do that too. How about this? I'm going to challenge Ramsey County to see if we can give 3 big things to uplift and take away, which means I'm giving each of you one that you really want to highlight. Ling, you went off mute. Go first.
You know, everybody knows the pre-COVID economy wasn't working for many, many people in our community. The same problems, you know, are still here. We had the filters just completely ripped off, and now they're just glaring, and we see every gap with 2020 vision, no matter where we look. And so I think for me, if the one thing that I think where we can really do some uplifting is around the CARES funding that we received as a county. I'm so grateful for the board's allocation of the money toward workforce services and for that strategic thinking around that. And we really threw out the playbook, you know, how we do things, and we did things in a very different way because of the urgency. And I think about the challenges in our community. That urgency has always been here. The generational and generations of poverty that can perpetuate in our society has always been here. COVID-19 has just put that flat in our face, where now the urgency feels so real. Like, I feel like every day Kari and I are talking and going, how much faster can we run? How much quicker can we pivot? And we're doing that within our whole system. And I am just so grateful that really when it comes to system change, we have to touch policies, we have to touch practices, resources, and power. And we have really been hitting all of those, even pre-COVID. And so I feel like, back to what I said at the very beginning, we were ready in a lot of ways, that we were ready a few feet ahead of ourselves in reacting to COVID, because some of these things were already embedded in our organization for change. And now we're just pushing ourselves even harder against that change. So thank you, Ryan.
Commissioner, I'll go to you next, but as you go there, I want to point out that Ling hit on my biggest one. When anyone ever wants to talk to me about how do you get started? How do you change the work? How do you struggle through it but make progress? My answer always comes back to, how are you structured? How are you funding it? What do your policies look like, and how do you carry them out? Because you can have success, you will also see your failures in broad daylight, so you can change them. It is every day, if you apply that metric, you can make progress. Commissioner Carter.
Yeah, and let me see, can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, ma'am.
So I just want to hold up the fact that we are so impressed every day as we work with our communities at the resilience of people who are coming to the table with us. Their resilience, their creativity to overcome odds are just outstanding. And so the one I'll hold out is people-centered design, you know, to actually manifest practices that put people at tables together. In fact, to go to their tables with the assets and the resources that are a part of government, to enjoin those with the assets and the resources that are part of community. I'm always impressed with the fact that we find artists, young people, we find architectural designers who have people-centered ideas that impact and change and greatly improve any ideas that we as government alone could come up with. So that's the one I'll add. Thank you.
Great addition. Kari.
Yeah, and I'll just add, Mike, you said zoning code, and that's a trigger for me. So I just want to say, you know, I will be connecting with you after this. Zoning codes are merely artifacts of a system that previously wasn't working. And I just want to talk about what is the power of merely talking about this? What is the power of the Powering Inclusion Summit? It gets change moving, it gets people talking. As a result of the vision plan, I had the Minnesota Association of City Attorneys reach out to me and say, should we be doing an equity committee? What is our role in this? And can we do an equity audit of zoning codes? Can we put together an equity toolkit for municipalities? And I would love to help out with that. You know, it gets people talking. I want equity to be synonymous with economic development. And that some of the strategies and the tools that you'll find as a result of this vision plan, that our municipalities can say, whoa, we don't have that. We don't have that resource. We don't have that policy. And that we use our strength and the research that we've done to help inform them to say, you're missing the mark if you don't have one of these, you know, top 10 things, and to be a leader in that space. So I'm really excited about this. I'm excited about this conversation. I'm so, I can't, you know, stress enough the work that the Center for Economic Inclusion has done as strategic advisor to this work. But I think in terms of scaling and replicating, we're hopeful that this vision plan will be used by many regions and many counties and municipalities moving forward.
And we're going to transition into some comments and questions from the audience that have come in. And as we do, you know, I cannot say from where I sit, you can't do this work without good leaders in your organization who are willing to come to work and lean in. And that also means your elected leaders have to be there in many ways first, right? They are the ones that set a tone and policy lens. But you're also hearing from two directors today and their work. And there are many others in Ramsey County not here today who they work with. And even on days when we bump up with each other and you're trying to change systems, the biggest thing I feel, and this has changed, I've been with the county 8 years, I do not feel turf protection battles. I do not feel this is about me or you. What I feel like is we're frustrated and we're trying to figure this out, but we're trying to figure this out. We're working together. We agree the current system isn't working for everybody. And that's a real heartening moment, particularly when you sit in the county administrator seat and there are a lot of things that can bring you down. The things that bring you up are leaders like this, who you watch lean in every single day to the work. And that means a great deal. And they work really hard in that space. I'm going to give them a shout out on that today. Okay, so I have two random chat boxes going at the same time. One of them, through a Q&A I got, was, this all sounds great. Is there a comprehensive plan or collateral materials that will be shared so residents and businesses in the county are aware and can support this? I quickly put in a link to Ramsey County's Racial Equity Advancing Policy, which the board passed last year, that applies to the entire organization. And at the bottom of that link, it also underpins the rationale and other documents that really guide the work. So when we get to that policy side of our work, that's one of many answers. But and part of this is Allissa, who's on this call today, and she's kind of the one that's helping us do this. I'll work with her afterwards to share some information back, because we have a lot more than that. We'll mention them right here. And I also just want to say thank you to Allissa for helping us out. So Kari, how can we get if people want to read about the report you just talked about, how can they get a chance to do that?
If you go to RamseyCountyMeansBusiness.com, the first banner image, if you click on that, you'll see it mentioned at the top. It is a repository of all of the work to date. And that includes recordings of all of the past board workshops and materials, and includes all of the chronology of engagement efforts. So it should be really easy to find. And I would stress again, December 15th is where we'll be looking at strategies. That information will be housed there. And then we're looking at approving the large vision plan altogether. The board will be considering that late February, early March.
Ling, from the work happening at the Workforce Innovation Board and in partnership, do you want to add where you find resources for the work going on?
Yeah, you can look up ramseycounty.us/WIB, WIB. That's where we store our work with our Workforce Innovation Board. And I also want to call out that you can go to ramseycounty.us/RISE and see the work that we've been doing around our CARES funding. I want to call out the Center of Economic Inclusion too. They've been partnering with us on a cohort of Community Innovation and Inclusion Fund, which is a group of community organizations that have been partnering together. It's something we've never done as a county, where we've taken a group of vendors and sort of uplifted them in partnership with each other. And the Center for Economic Inclusion has been helping us with that work. In addition, on that site, you'll find a link to all the 100 organizations that we contracted with as well, to be able to kind of read about the depth and breadth of our community. And I think that's one takeaway, Ryan. I'll just take one more minute to say, we don't do this work alone. And I think Commissioner Carter, you alluded to that too, but especially in the workforce space, we have such a vast and innovative and creative ecosystem. The way they stepped up and partnered with us during a very challenging time of COVID and civil unrest, to be able to send forth these amazing proposals and really execute on so much great work in a very short amount of time, with very challenging federal funding guidelines, as you can imagine. I mean, we are just in awe and humbled by this community, and so grateful for the work that they have done and the people that they've been serving, especially our youth and young adults. I echo Commissioner Carter's urgency that we have a very young, diverse population. And Mike, as you talk about just that, who is that bottom level that we need to uplift, like, that is the group that we are most concerned with. When I look from my chair every day, is to think about especially those 18 to 24-year-olds within Ramsey County that are disconnected from school and other things. We have a real challenge among us to figure out how they can plug into this economy. And if it's tech and if it's entrepreneurship, we have to find a path for that for them if we're going to be a successful community.
Every young person is our young person. We have to have that type of standard we apply to our work going forward and as a community. Commissioner Carter, you were going to add something.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that we will also be placing a link to our racial equity policies and our policies around community engagement. You know, I am impressed with the manner in which recently we have devised ways of working with organizations, nonprofit organizations who are on the ground and who can nimbly work with us on our various needs for strategies to pull in those community learnings that we need to move forward with. So I'm impressed that at this point in time, we're able to see in every decision that our board makes a perspective on how racial equity has been centered, a perspective on how community has actually been engaged. And those are bedrock and foundation for the work that we're doing. Will help us to do better.
Thank you. Mike, resources from the NIC or the book you referenced earlier or other work you've done, where would you suggest people take a look and get to read?
Well, let me say this. I'm a big fan of Tawana Black and the Center for Economic Inclusion. The NIC wants to support the work that you are already doing at Ramsey County. You guys are doing great work, and I'm excited to hear all of the, and I want to get to those links as well to see what you guys are doing. But one of the things we're working with the EDA on is developing an inclusive competitiveness index that will help regions like yourself with new metrics and a new way of looking at how you improve your regional competitiveness by investing in the value assets that start with your people. And again, the most vulnerable populations are our priority. So how do you invest in cultivating the talent that is already there, but has been underutilized and underinvested? And so this inclusive competitiveness index is going to help provide that type of guidance and that type of policy making information through data. Now, that being said, the book is called The Future Economy and Inclusive Competitiveness: How Demographic Trends and Innovation Can Create Prosperity for All Americans. And it was written by Jonathan Hollyfield. Again, he's the White House director on HBCUs and my co-founding partner at Scale Up Partners. And we published this 3 years ago. And the foreword was written by Jay Williams, who used to be the former Deputy Secretary of Commerce for EDA. And so it's being used throughout the country, and we encourage you to get that book. And if you need any partnership and consulting work with the NIC, let us know, because we're connected.
We do. Mike, I'll also say I got to be impressed that as an economist, you didn't use the word marginal utility once while talking about where we should think about where investment needs to occur. But that's a joke that only like 3 of us on this call may get. I appreciate everyone else for laughing along with us. Okay, so back to the topic. There was a comment also here. Someone said that is so true earlier to what we were talking about. There is still a lot of opportunity in industries that can offer family sustaining wages, but the industries themselves haven't figured out how to attract those workers and dispel the myths. Manufacturing sector, tech sector, et cetera. So I'm going to add one piece, if it's okay, to even Cassandra's piece here, and then I'm going to go to Ling first from the workforce side. It's both about how do you help industries figure out how to attract, but we also see the same structures in government that have been in place for a long time are deeply embedded in industry as well, for many of the reasons Mike mentioned. It's not one sector that this carries. This is an America problem, not a single sector problem. So Ling, how do you bring business along in this journey so it's not just government talking to themselves and academics?
I think, obviously I keep going pre-COVID, post-COVID, while we're in COVID, but, pre-COVID, employers lack qualified applicants, right, for high demand jobs. We have one of the largest opportunity gaps in the nation here in Ramsey County. Post-COVID, same thing, right? The problem hasn't really changed for employers. It's just what are they willing to walk the talk? And I think this is what this conference actually is a lot about. We've had a lot of people when it's a very low unemployment, when we were at 2-3% here in the Twin Cities, kind of start to come over to the workforce center and say, how can we connect with some folks and maybe for the need of just filling some spots, right? Now we have people coming for a different reason. We recently had a business come in, and Kari and I are very active on something called the East Team in St. Paul, where we work on business retention and attraction with a lot of community partners. And we had a large corporation say, we want to locate in the Midway. And it's because we want to employ people in the Midway. It was like a totally different conversation, right? We want you to look on your systems and help us create a career pathway on how to help people build a career with us. And we want to be intentional about that. And I think it's that mind shift for employers to decide when they are ready to engage in a different kind of conversation. They not to just look for people because we want to fill seats and chairs, but we want to create an inclusive economy. And that has some different strategies if they're going to choose to do that than trying to just fill chairs. And I would just say the other pivot that we've made around that question is that I think there was a long time that we felt like a lot of our people who are BIPOC and have experienced barriers all wanted to work in some kind of middle management job in a Fortune 500 company. I'm no longer convinced of that. I actually think some people might, but boy, we have a lot of people that want to be entrepreneurs and they want to work for themselves. So as much as we want to change corporations and businesses, if they don't want to change, we can empower our community to work for themselves and own their own businesses as well, right? And so businesses are going to decide if they want to change because the talent's going to go and create it for themselves if we do our work right. So I hope that gets to a little bit of it.
And then those entrepreneurs get sought after by Fortune 500
That's
businesses
right.
anyway, and they find their way in because the market suggests there's a way to make that happen at some point, and that's all good for how this is supposed to work.
And on that point,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was just going to add that on that point, it works that way in some families. That kind of experience and entrepreneurial spirit is embedded from the opportunity to connect, the accessibility. So this work that you all are doing around making this accessible and encouraging entrepreneurship among young people is about plugging that opportunity gap, creating those opportunities for that experience to be had at that level and then to be taken forward, as Ryan says, to be recruited into those jobs that otherwise would not be available.
Thank you, Commissioner. Kari.
Or to be an entrepreneur.
Okay. I'll just add to, just piggybacking off of what Ling was saying, the economic development of the past used to be about winning and losing. We used to compete in our region, compete across the state, for that business. And we didn't really care what the business was. It was, we need a win, and that's what it was about. However, that's changing, and we have enough knowledge about what our community needs are, where we can stop being so reactive and stop honing in on quickly getting as much information to them as possible so that they'll select your community to say, all right, here's what we have available. but how are you going to meet the needs of our community? Because it's a two-way street. And before it was, even if the industry didn't fit and it wasn't necessarily bringing anything, it was just get the win. And that is changing. And that's a very, I'm very optimistic about that change to say, what are you bringing into our community and how does that meet the needs of our community that are most in need? So something to look forward to.
Mike, and I'd love for you to answer the question. Could you remind me of your book's name again? There's an ask and I want to put it in the chat. Sorry, your colleague's book's name. I'm giving you credit for his book, which is okay too.
Well, I'm in there.
There you go.
I helped publish it.
Good.
There it is.
The Future Economy and Inclusive Competitiveness. Thank you.
There you go. So let me ask you a question, because I was doing just a little bit of background on your state, and what I found was in a report, and the report's a little bit outdated, it's about 5 years old, but the report said that you have a certain number of employer businesses in your state, and you have a certain population in your state. And when I started looking at the demographics of your population, and I started looking at the demographics of the population of employers, here's what I found. 94% of your employers are white. 94%. And so all of your minority employers equal about 6%. So if you break that down to regions, and if I looked at your region and the demographics of the population of your region, it would come out to a variety of different variables. If I looked at the population of your employers and the demographics of your employers in that region, what would I find?
Ling, are you able to share anything from the WIB's perspective on that out of the gate?
Not offhand. I don't think I can answer directly that question. I don't know, Kari, can you help me out? Do we have any sense of? Yeah, Mike, I think you caught us on that one. I don't know if I can.
I would
Well,
say.
I don't mean to interject any type of consternation.
No, that's a good
Yeah.
question.
What I really
Yeah,
want,
it's a good
I want us to
question.
think about, I
Yeah,
want us to think about the parallel. If we
Yeah.
can break down the demographics of our population, and we do,
Mhm.
then we can break down the demographics of the population of employers, because
Right.
they're all registered businesses, right?
Right.
So we can
Well,
get that.
and I think, and Mike, you raise a good point. So 50% of Ramsey County businesses are actually micro enterprises. And so we are a local economy built on small business, which means that business retention and expansion is critical. But that also, to your point, Mike, is an opportunity to grow minority business enterprises from within and to ensure that they have the resources they need to expand, that they have the workforce that they need to expand. And that is critical. You know, we have a lot of really great employers here, large employers, but really we are an economy of small business, which is why, you know, our efforts are really channeled on that. I'm really pleased through the CARES Act Fund, as Ling mentioned, Ramsey County partnered with 14 culturally specific technical assistance agencies to ensure that a strong percentage of those applying for grant relief resources were minority business enterprises. And because we know that they're the most vulnerable coming out of this pandemic. And we are on a trajectory to get, over $15 million out in small business relief as a result of the strong partnerships with all of those outreach agencies. But then the next question becomes, okay, where are the industries that have the ability to grow? And how can we nurture that so that our landscape does start to change?
And, Mike, on a broader level, what I want to mention that you hit on is the ugliest reality in the state of Minnesota and our region is that on almost any macro level, we appear to be doing very well. And you see that in the data that shows up. But when you drill into that and particularly take race and ethnicity into account as a part of that evaluation, what we see is an economy built on strong inequality. And that's an ugly reality that Minnesotans need to own as part of their story. Racism is not explicit in the way that it is in some places across the country. And that's not to say there is not explicit racism in Minnesota, to be very clear. But we often go about it with this ugly smile, and it's in the background a lot of times, but it's not for so many people. And so you pull the data point there. Housing and home ownership is absolutely one of them. If you look at housing disparities in this region, and that all comes back to a lot of what we talked about. So I wanted to acknowledge that. And it does lead to some of what we're talking about here too, around where do we go? You know, the hardest thing sometimes is we do have to get in rooms with employers and other governments and ourselves, and you can't make friends with people while having these conversations sometimes. Like you will not be a popular person in the room when you acknowledge the racism that exists in the structures around you. It just, and you have to make friends with that before you enter the room. I think is a big part of this in our work.
Yeah, Ryan, I have a couple things. Oh, go ahead,
Sorry,
Mike.
let's go to Mike and then we'll go to Ling.
Yeah.
Can I give you an entry point? Because I deal with Seattle a lot. Seattle is, you know,
Same thing.
Highest concentration of STEM educated workers, you know, high incomes, land values of 600,000 average. I mean, they are fat, dumb, and happy. But guess what? Inequality there is extraordinary. It's on the level of Detroit when you start looking at. Well, let me give you an entry point. The entry point that we use is: would you like to increase the productivity of your least productive population? Everybody says yes. All right, now we've got an entry point. That's simple as that. Would you like to increase the productivity coming out of your least productive populations in both workforce and entrepreneurial pipelines? What would that do to your economy? Everybody says yes.
So how about this? I'm learning that as we're on a virtual panel, I still never end quite on time. So I at least have remained consistent across my life, both in person and virtually. I want to give 1 minute to each panelist on a final thought that they want to leave with this group. I want to thank everybody that's hung in there with us. We've had a good group throughout. There's been engagement. We will work on bringing resources back out. And most importantly, we want to continue working together. This work doesn't start or stop here. We need your help. We cannot do this work alone. We come with ideas and passion, but we don't have all the answers ourselves. Mike, final thoughts from you first.
Did you say me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So final thought, numbers don't lie. We inherited some terrible numbers, but we mask those numbers by saying we don't know. We don't know who owns the homes versus who rent the homes. We don't know why we have single family homes over here versus multifamily homes over there. We don't know. The reality is we do know. Get the numbers. We know how many STEM graduates we have. We know how many schools have wraparound services needed to care for the most vulnerable students. And we know that that's their escape from the challenges they face. We know we have to cultivate a talent pipeline that's ready for a 21st century. We know we have to create those and train those economic athletes. And we know when we do, they will provide the kind of regional competitiveness that is sustainable with all the various different challenges we face, particularly with climate change coming. We're gonna need our people. They are our most valuable assets.
Thank you, Mike. Commissioner Carter, final word. You muted yourself.
Sorry, striking the same tone. You know, certainly we're looking forward to the results of the work that we're doing and hoping that we are headed down the right path, but knowing that equity is necessary to sustain growth, to create the opportunity for competitiveness. So knowing who we are, you know, knowing what our challenges and opportunities are, and working to create those creative ways and innovative ways of addressing those challenges and opportunities means plugging gaps to get us to where we need to be and to sustain our growth and opportunity for the future. So let's do it.
Thank you. Ling.
You know, I'll do a comment just about focusing on ourselves as leaders. And I think that when I mean that, I mean everybody within our organization, right? I mean, every day we come to work, the work is urgent, but it actually feels good, I think, on most days, even when the work feels tense. And there's times where I read a statistic or I see a report of something we're doing and kind of get a bad feeling in my stomach. And that's actually a good thing, right? Like we need to be okay with not being okay with the way it's been. And then now when we shine community on it, to be able to bring that report to other people to see and to feel that same like pit in our stomach and kind of embrace it, right? Like I've really been working on that personally. And I hope this conference is a chance for many leaders within organizations up and down, you know, the vertical of whatever role you play, to just really lean in on that uncomfortability, because I feel like that we know we're doing something right when we feel some of those feelings. So I appreciate being able to work for an organization that puts me in that spot a lot. And I think it's a good thing for our organization. So thank you, Ryan.
Thanks, Ling. Kari.
Well, we're building a new table. So the purpose of these sessions isn't just to say, look at what we're doing, right? It's to help support others to join us. And, you know, if you're, depending on where you're at, if you're with a nonprofit or a private business or a municipality, it's to, you know, challenge and disrupt and say, hey, city, when was the last time you did an equity audit of your policies and of your regulations? Or, hey, do we have an affordable policy around this? Or what are you doing to support small businesses and BIPOC businesses? And so, you know, the takeaway after this whole summit is to say, now that we know what we know, and we're all at the table and we're building the table together, what is all of our collective roles? It's not just Ramsey County's role, it's not the state, it's not the city. We all have to be at the table saying, hey, what are we doing to advance this work? So I would encourage everybody on this call to take it back to their organization or what they may be doing, and to figure out how they can plug that into their work.
Thanks, Kari. My final thought for you is, if you're waiting for somebody else to change the world around you, please don't. It takes everybody doing it every day. And this group was doing that. I hope you heard that with the panelists here today. You were all extremely uplifting, and it's really great to see the work happening not only here, but in many other places. And we leave with questions, but also energy from getting to listen to you all as panelists. Thanks again to the attendees. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and the rest of your conference. Please stay healthy and look forward to interacting with all of you again soon. Bye now.